All right, get ready to focus. This is Miles Biggs, your host of Relish the Journey. And our guest coming up very shortly is C. Gordon Moose, also known as Your Focus Guy, getting into all things mindset and focus, what that means to him, his journey towards the topics, and what he does now to help other people on their journeys. So let's get into it. Hey, C. Gordon, thanks for joining us on the podcast. I'm excited to get into your story.
Well, thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Of course. So you are known as Your Focus Guy. And so, of course, I got to ask, right? How did you become the focus guy, right? Were you always Mr. Focus and Productivity, or did you struggle with that, taught yourself, and now you teach others? What's the story there?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. No, I have not always been focused. That's for sure. So, I'm a big fan of Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich, which is basically what I've been trained in for the last 2 or 3 decades. So, just going through and getting to a certain point in my life, looking back and seeing where I've been successful or patterns of where I've been self-sabotaging or not successful. And it always came down to focus for me, whether it was in my athletic career or with my relationships or my professional career. When I was more focused, I saw patterns. When I was more focused, I was more successful. And when I was less focused, I was less successful. So I really started connecting the dots, with everything that I had learned and all the work that I've done and studied and the books that I've read. For me, it really comes down to focus. And, when I'm super focused, or 10x focus, like what I want to say is, I'm more successful. So that's really where it comes down. And then, people would invite me and say, what's your secret? How do you do it? And so that's where the whole Find Your Focus and Your Focus Guy really morphed from people just, requesting and want to find out more about what I'm up to.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, focus, small word, big meaning, right? It's very tiny as far as English words goes, and it seems like it should be simple, and what you say makes total sense. Yeah, when I'm more focused, I'm more successful, but it's not always that easy, right? Especially in our world of digital distractions. So how did you discover it? I mean, how did you unearth that idea of, I just need to focus? And how do you define focus? Where do you start? Let's dive into that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know who Bob Proctor is. Bob Proctor is, he's been around. He's probably most famous for his part in the movie The Secret. And I was fortunate enough, I worked with Bob for about 3 years. I had a year-long coaching program with him. And, he's been around for a long time. He's on the Napoleon Hill Foundation. He knew Napoleon Hill personally, along with Earl Nightingale and Zig Ziglar and, all the icons. And so he used to have us do focus exercises. I mean, he would have us do things like get 80 pennies or 80 items, whether they were paper clips or pebbles or pennies, and just one by one move them from one place to another and focus on nothing but that. In other words, to really train your brain to shut everything else out, right? And I remember one time when I was having trouble, believe it or not, he told me he said, "You have grass in your backyard?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Well, your exercise today is go out and watch the grass grow." I said, "What?" He said, "I want you to get down on the ground, put your head, on the ground and watch the grass grow." And I thought he was kidding, but he said, "You do know the grass grows, right?" I'm like, "Well, yeah." He goes, "I want you to focus on one blade of grass until you see it grow." And so that's what I did. And, it took me about 50 minutes, but there was no wind and the grass actually moved. I saw the grass move. And so the point is he was training me how to really shut out all other distractions and to focus all of my attention on, and my willpower on one task, one item, and that's when it really dawned on me that, we're endowed with these amazing mental muscles, right? Our intuition, our imagination, our perception, our reasoning, our memory, and our willpower. And, we all have it. We all have very tremendous wills. And focus is a function of your willpower. So how do you tap into that, right? And that's where the Think and Grow Rich stuff came into play. Because, for anybody that's read that book, desire is the starting point of all achievement. That's the first chapter in the book. So when you have desire-based focus, in other words, when you are very clear on what you want, why you want it, and how you're going to make it happen in your life, and you use that desire to focus your willpower and your energy, you can move mountains. And that's really where I started to really develop the combination of what Bob was having me do with focus and other things that I've studied with focus with the Think and Grow Rich stuff, because it's really all about desire-based focus. When your desire is so real for you and so tangible that you can touch it, taste it, see it, feel it, you can focus on it. And when you do that, things just start to move in your direction. So that's really how it came about for me.
Yeah, what really comes to my mind when you're talking about that is it sounds like that was really meditation exercises before meditation was as popular as it is now, right? Like you said, it's tuning out all the distractions and focusing on one thing, whether you're moving pennies from one side of a table to another or watching grass grow. It's sort of like a walking meditation in some respects, where you get so dialed in on that exercise that you get clarity on everything else. Good.
I totally agree with you. You're grounding yourself, you're centering yourself, right? You're cutting out those distractions, right? You're concentrating on things like your breath, right? And absolutely, it's a form of meditation, 100%. However, and I meditate every day, which I'm sure you and a lot of your listeners do as well. It's a great practice, and however, the only thing I found missing was that when you add your desire in, right, and you add the emotional connection that you have to your desire, you can channel that energy, towards that desire. Where typically in meditation, you're really shutting everything out, and you're 100% correct. There's parallel lines there that you're referring to, and it is really about grounding. It's about settling. It's about calming down, right? Bob Proctor's got a great saying. He says you don't have to slow down. He said you should settle down, right? Calm down, right? You don't have to slow down, calm down, right? And so when you have that desire right there in front of you, you can close your eyes and see it. That's where you can concentrate your will. And obviously, for people that are very well practiced in meditation, they've trained their brain to be able to do that, and so they're ahead of the game, 100%.
So this makes so much sense to me, partially because I've done all this work on myself, like really finding my own type of focus and ways to do that. I know I take it for granted sometimes because it's something that I focus on often, and I'm always on some other topic of, self-mastery. What do you think for people that are just getting into this, just opening themselves up to this idea, where do they start? Like, what do you do to start focus or start meditation or sort of tap into that power of, like you said, still being busy, but settling in and settling down into the busy instead of being frantic with it?
Right. Well, I am not an expert on meditation. I know what works for me. I think that is a big component. And when you use those practices, it just helps you, I believe, in all areas of your life. So, my first thing to do is if that's something that, that speaks to you, go get some training in that. I mean, you can, almost everywhere across the country, there's places where you can go and learn techniques for meditation, which is key. As far as what desire-based focus, it all starts with your desire. It all starts with really drilling down and peeling back the layers of the onion with regard to what you want. And I'll give you a perfect example. I was on a call this morning, a coaching call, and it was one of our first calls. And we always start there. And I asked the individual, I said, "What is it that you want?" And she started going in different areas. I said, "No, pick one of the 5 areas of your life." Which, by the way, I'd be more than happy to share this with your listeners. Pick one of the 5 areas of your life, right? Because what we do is we try to eat the elephant all in one bite. So, the 5 areas are just in general, no particular order. Your relationships, right, as number 1. Number 2, your health and your wellness, right? Your health being your body and your wellness being your mind, right? That's the second category. The third one is your education and your profession. The fourth one is your revenue, your income, your resources, your capital, your money, right? And I left money for the end because a lot of people think money is everything, but you've got resources and capital and revenue in far different areas. So that's number 4. And then the last one is your spirit. So, I told her, I said, which of those areas do you want to focus on now, right? So it's rather than trying to focus on your entire life at once, which is the mistake that I used to make, pick one of those areas, right? And she said her profession. I said, great, let's focus on your profession. And then I said, what do you want in your profession? And she said, well, I don't want to be beholden to anybody and go to work for anybody anymore. And she makes a pretty good salary. I said, okay, great. And then she said, and I want financial freedom. I'm like, well, that's cool. Those two things are, they are connected. I said, however, that is really a separate, that's the money, the revenue side. However, you can work on them together. So to make a long story short, we took those two areas and we started to really define what it is that she wants, right? And I kept asking her this question, why? Every time she came up with an answer, I would say, why? Why do you want that? And she'd come up with another answer. I said, well, why do you want that, right? It usually happens about the fourth or fifth, sometimes the sixth time you ask that why question. Every time you come up with an answer, when you're focusing on something, you keep asking, well, why do I want that? And why do I want that, right? Because you're narrowing that focus. Do you understand what I mean? And then when you get to that emotional, you can hear it in their voice, right? When you're face to face with somebody, you can see it in their gestures and their body language. They actually get to the emotional why, right? So that's when you're really getting to that desire and that real reason why you want to do it. And when you keep that present, right, for them, and there's different ways and different techniques to do that, to keep it present, over a sustained period of time. That's when all of a sudden everything that they do starts to move in that direction. They start to focus their energy on that, and they start to exclude and eliminate distractions, right? So it is sort of meditation, on a specific thing that you desire.
Yeah, totally. Your whole asking why thing. I used to work in a manufacturing environment, and that's really a principle of lean manufacturing is, asking why all those times to go from a symptom of a problem to the actual problem. So it's interesting to hear you apply that to, a person and those areas of your life. So it's neat.
I think it's probably the most important question we could ever ask ourselves, right? Forget about the how, right? Bob Proctor's got a great song. He said, forget about the how. If the why is big enough, you'll figure out the how, right? If the why is big enough, you'll figure out the how. And most people, especially if you're an A personality, you want to figure out how before you get going. Well, that's kind of ass backwards, pardon my French. But, the biggest question you should always ask yourself is, why am I going to do the next thing that I'm going to do? It either moves you towards your desire when you know what it is and it's clearly defined, or it moves you away from your desire. There's no standing still. You're either moving towards your desire or you're moving away from it. And it's always that next step. And you should always ask yourself, why? Why am I taking this next step? And that to me is the most important question.
Well, you walked right into it here, right? So I'm going to ask you why. Why are you the focus guy? What's your desire with everything that you're doing in this field?
Yeah. Well, let me answer that question by making the distinction between goals, vision, and purpose, because I think a lot of people don't understand that. My goal in 2020 is to have 100,000 people that have been exposed to me and my programs, whether it's through meetup groups and Facebook and LinkedIn and podcasts. And, we're doing a October event where we're probably going to have, 1,000 people there. And by the way, I'm nowhere near there. I'm nowhere near, not even close to halfway being there. So I've given myself until December 31st at midnight of 2020. And my goal is 100,000 people. The vision is that I have in achieving that goal, right, is doing things like this, podcasts, networking with influencers, doing events, and so on and so forth, right? My purpose, right, which I really think is the question you're asking me, my purpose is to create safety and security and comfort and pleasure for myself, my family, my friends, and my community. And that's why I do everything I do. That's been for probably the last 10, 11 years, maybe 12 years. Everything I've done, even though in that period of time, I've had several different, positions and gigs and everything else. That's it. My purpose is safety and security, comfort and pleasure for myself, my family, my friends, and my community. It's because I know that when I bring that to the conversation and when I bring that to everything I do, it changes the world. And I don't mean to be corny, but at the end of the day, we're all here for a purpose, right? And that's my purpose. And that's why I do everything. And I do it through training people to really get 10x focus and what I call mega max personally productive. Because when you're productive, time no longer exists. It doesn't matter because you're making the best use of everything that you're doing. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's it. I mean, it's all about safety and security and comfort and pleasure for me and everybody that I come into contact with.
Yeah, I mean, and there's no doubt that you're passionate and knowledgeable about what you're doing. It comes through in the way you're talking right now. I'm curious, before you found this desire and your why and your desire, right? What was life like for you, right? I can't imagine you weren't always this upbeat and positive and so sure about what you were doing. Let's roll the clock back, right? What was it like before you figured all this out?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I thought I forgot about that part of my life, but no. It's I was very selfish. I mean, it was all about me. And the thing that really changed my life was when my daughter was born, which was about 16 years ago, and I was very selfish. I was earning a lot of money. I was just doing whatever I felt like doing. I was I didn't have any real responsibilities. Therefore, one could say I was irresponsible. I wasn't really doing anything bad or wrong. I just wasn't doing anything super productive. And, I was wasting time and energy and money and running through relationships. And, it wasn't real pretty. I mean, it wasn't ugly, but, looking back, it was kind of a waste of time, which is, if I could go back and recapture those 20 years, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I traveled all over the world. I've met great people. I've lived in different places. I mean, I've had a really great life. That's not my point. My point is I would have had more direction, right? And I would have been more focused. I would have been more productive. And so, I've really, I've realized that the world does not revolve around me and that there's something bigger out there. There's a higher calling, again, another distinction I like to make with people: passion versus purpose, right? Passion, I was doing what I love doing, right? Passion is when you do what you love to do, whether it's painting or ice skating or riding your bike or sailing. That's something you do for yourself. But your purpose is really your passion beyond yourself, right? So it's about what you love doing, but it's in service beyond you. It's bigger than you, right? So I was really living that passionate life, but it was all about me, until I really realized that I'm here for a bigger purpose, right? And so now I'm being passionate about doing something bigger beyond my life, right? And so again, I had a great life. I had a lot of fun, but it wasn't as focused and it wasn't as purposeful, And as corny as that sounds, it's really true for me.
No, it doesn't sound corny at all to me, because I feel like similar thing happened to me when my son was born 2.5 years ago. It's like you think you get why you're on the planet and what you want out of things, and then you become a parent, and it completely changes everything. So I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, wait till he becomes a teenager.
Oh gosh, I feel like he already is. He's 2.5 going on 20. It's wild. He's got quite a little attitude on him. It's funny.
That's funny. Well, but it's true though, and again, it's so funny. You can appreciate this. Remember when you used to go out when you're married and your friends that had kids, you'd be like, oh my God, they're talking about their kids again, right? Well, I mean, the guys that I graduated from college with, that got married when they were right out of college, while I was screwing around during my 20s and 30s, I mean, they were having kids and, running businesses and buying real estate. And I was just, footloose and fancy free. And I look back and go, geez, maybe they were on the right path.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we all have our own way to get where we need to go eventually, right? I always say to that people about regrets. Whenever I'm a guest on podcasts, I often get a question like that, right? About what's your biggest regret or something you would change. And I know I can honestly say it would be nothing, because I just don't think I'd be where I'm at right now if I didn't go through everything I went through, right? I wouldn't have the full appreciation for everything I have and everything I'm going to do and have done, and et cetera, if I hadn't had the quote unquote regrets along the way.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's like the Sanskrit way of thinking. Everybody's on their own path. Exactly. It's so funny because I was thinking about that walking down the street today, and I was thinking, like, everything has led me up to this point. Like every decision I ever made, for good or for ill, everything I did, and that's the way life is. And I don't think it takes a certain level of maturity, not necessarily age, because I don't age is relative, but I'm talking about maturity to really understand that. And then you can forgive yourself, right? You can look back and say, okay, now I can see why I did that. And it's okay, as long as you didn't hurt anybody or, you know what I mean? It's, you can look back and say, okay, now there's nothing I can do about that except learn from the past and move on into, create a new future or the future that you want. So I totally agree with you. I mean, I really don't have that many regrets. There are a few things obviously that I did. I I'd like to go back and redo, mostly in relationships. I probably, could have been a little bit better boyfriend, or whatever, maybe a better son, once or twice. But, for the most part, I totally agree with you. Everything you've done in your life has led you to this point. The question is, what are you going to do now? And I think that's a very important question.
Right. Yeah. And I like that word you touched on, maturity. And I'm curious in all your dealings with folks, and you're not at 100,000 yet, but I'm sure it's a good amount of people, several thousand that you've worked with and interacted with in some fashion, right? How do you think maturity factors into focus? And do you get any sort of immature pushback on, this whole idea of people that say you're full of crap and that's not going to fix their problems?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because, I run Think and Grow Rich groups where we go for about 15 or 16 weeks. And we take each chapter, and each week what we do is the homework is to read the chapter, and then we do a live Zoom call and we talk about the chapter. It's usually there's, anywhere from 10 to 20 people in the room or in the Zoom or whatever. And it's so funny because usually around week 3, people are they're in, right? Because if they stick around for that long, which they do because they pay ahead of time. Did you ever see the National Geographics or whatever, where all the penguins are lined up on the cliff and they're all waiting to jump in? I mean, there's got to be millions of them, right? And then,
right.
One penguin finally jumps in and then they all jump in. I don't know if they're waiting for killer whales or sharks or whatever, but that's kind of how it is right around week 3 or week 4. You always got one person that's got their hands folded and they're just, negative and whatever. It's a bunch of crap, and then right around week 3 or 4, they all jump in and they're in for the long haul. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, I mean, emotional maturity, really being able to take a hard, cold look in the mirror, because a lot of people get confronted, when you challenge them. And I tell people, I said, listen, I'm you hired me to be your coach and be your guide. I'm going to tell it how it is. And, if I'm going to call you out on stuff because that's what you want me to do. You don't want me to fall for your old games and listen to your ego, right? And allow you to be, a coward with regard to facing your fears. You want me to call you, to be courageous, right? And so people absolutely get confronted. I mean, and it's so easy. I've trained thousands of people, so I see it coming, you know what I mean? And I know it's going to happen. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this type of work is confronting. When you have to look at yourself in the mirror, it's something most people do. And another exercise Bob Proctor had me do. He said, I want you every morning before you brush your teeth or shave. He said, I want you to get about 6 inches from the mirror and for 60 seconds, just stare at yourself in the mirror. Just look at your eyes in the mirror. Do you know most people don't do that? It's very uncomfortable. Most people cannot even stand in the privacy of their own bathroom, 6 inches from the mirror and look at themselves in the eye. And it was an exercise to say, you need to look at yourself in the mirror because, if you're not willing to do that, then you're not being honest with yourself. And you're not being honest with anybody else. And they'll see right through you.
Right.
So absolutely, this type of work, when you're guiding people through this, it can be confronting for people.
Yeah, and if you're not willing to look at yourself, right, what right do you have to look at other people and judge them, right? It's that whole idea as well.
Well, and that brings up exactly. We judge people. We judge other people based on their actions. We judge ourselves based on our intentions, right? I mean, totally different standard. It's a double standard, right? And so, well, I intended to do that, so I'm okay. Even though I, did something wrong, and we were quick to judge others, based on what they did, right? But it's really about that introspective, right? Looking at ourselves and saying, if you can't be honest with yourself, how in the world can you expect anybody else to be honest with you? Or if you can't love yourself, how can you expect anybody else to love you? Or if you can't trust yourself, how can you expect anybody else to trust themselves? So a lot of that is, a lot of the work is focusing on yourself, right? And so that's where it all begins. And a lot of people are we're not trained to do that. We're really not. We're trained to look outside of ourselves. The government's going to solve our problems, or it's my boss's problem at work, or my spouse is, everything is my spouse's fault, right? We don't look within because that's the root of it.
Right. Yeah. Isn't it funny? Probably the biggest skill you could learn in life is how to live with yourself and know yourself and how you move about the world. And that's They don't teach that anywhere in any level of our education system, right? It's
Definitely
interesting.
not the Western. I mean, if you want to do that, go to Tibet and do a 30-day silence
Right.
retreat where you're literally silent for 30 days. That you want to open your eyes, that's an eye opener.
Have you ever done that?
No, I haven't. I've gone for about 4 days though.
That's a long time.
It's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, it's really not easy. And there's monks that do it for years.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's crazy. So I'm curious, when you were first getting started, your child was born, you sort of started to make this pivot. You set out on this path with the desire to better yourself and to find your focus and then help others find theirs. Was there any real solid piece of advice other than some of the anecdotes you've already shared from Bob Proctor that stand out to you that you still think about today?
Well, I've been very fortunate because I played hockey. I had a semi-professional hockey career. I played in college. So I've had some really incredible mentors and coaches, and I got to tell you I'll share a real quick experience. I used to go to Notre Dame summer hockey camp, right? And the college guys, the guys that played college for Notre Dame at the time were the counselors because they were there during the season. You can't really carry a full load. So they would do their summer school and then they'd work as counselors. And get paid. They'd make a couple of bucks and they'd stay on the ice and so on and so forth. Well, there was one gentleman, his name was Alex Pyrus. He had about an 8-year career in the NHL, but he was my coach, right? I think it was probably 14 years old. And, I've been around hockey all my life. I've met Gordie Howe and Jerry Cheevers and Bobby Orr and Bobby Hall, and you name it, I've met them, right? Never asked any of them for a career, right? Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, the whole 9 yards, right? Never Chelios, never asked any of them for autograph. Well, the only autograph I've ever gotten in my life from a hockey player was from Alex Pyrus. And it was I'll never forget, it was the last day of summer camp. And I idolized him. He was just not because he was an incredible hockey player, which, by the way, he was, just because he was a good guy, right? And he really cared about us, right? And I just asked him for an autograph. And he wrote, and I still have it, by the way, he wrote, "To a great hockey player, Moose," right? Which is that's what he called me, to a great hockey player, Moose, right? And then he signed it Alex Pyrus. Well, I found it years later because I stuck it in a Bible that I kept, and that really stuck with me. I've had that. I carry with. I've had it. It's laminated now. But to answer your question, that really made an impact on me. When I looked at that and he said I was a great hockey player, I lived into that. I actually, in that moment, I believed that, right? And from then on, everything I did, that kept resonating with me, right? And I just fell back on that. And it was probably one of the greatest things that anybody could have ever done for me because he believed in me, right? And he was willing to put it on a piece of paper and sign his name to it. And it gave me the confidence to really do things that I otherwise probably wouldn't have done. Not only in hockey, but in other areas of my life as well. So, and you can appreciate this, you really have to be careful what you say to people because you never know how it's going to sit with them. You never know what impact it's going to have, right? And so certainly as a parent, our kids repeat everything we say. So, but beyond that, be kind to people, be nice to people, be complimentary to people. It's just be gracious with people because you never know who they are. You never know what they're going through and you never know how that might impact. And you want to hear a funny story? Years later, I'm talking like 25 years later, I was doing business with a guy and he was of Alex Pyrus in Notre Dame, right? Now I lost track of Alex, right? Because remember, Alex was a college kid when I was in like 9th grade. And he said he went to Notre Dame. And I said, "Well, how old are you?" And he said, "Well," I said, "Really? I used to go to Notre Dame hockey camp." He goes, "Oh, my roommate was on the hockey team." And I said, "You're kidding." I said, "What was your roommate's name?" He said, "Alex." And I said, "You mean Alex Pyrus?" You should have seen the look on this guy's face. He goes, "How in the hell did you know that?" I said, "He was my coach. I used to go to Notre Dame hockey camp." He said, "You're kidding." He said, "He's one of my best friends." 2 days later, I'm sitting at a Starbucks with Alex Pyrus.
Ah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And I brought the piece of paper that he signed. I said, "Do you remember signing this?" He said, "No." I said, "It made such a huge difference in my life." It almost made him cry. And he's, 50 years old. So, you just never know. You just never know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, because one thing was powerful about what you said, it sort of became an identity piece for you, right? You believed then you were a great hockey player, so then you started to identify as one, carry yourself as one, talk to yourself as one, and it took someone else saying it first. So to your point, we never know how what we say affects others. We're shaping the identities of other people, whether we realize it or not. And so it's really important to be careful with what we say and really focus on building each other up as much as possible because why do anything else, right?
Well, and it starts with you. I mean, the second chapter of the book, Think and Grow Rich, is called autosuggestion, right? And it's really the medium by which you influence the subconscious mind. What is your internal dialogue? What's your conversation with yourself? Because it's your voice is the voice that you hear most in your life, right? Nobody else in your life are you going to hear their voice more than yours, right? And so your voice is the most important voice to listen to. And so many people have negativity and negative thoughts going through their mind, right? And really getting a handle on that is key. But I agree with you 100%. His belief in me was bigger than my belief in myself. And Bob Proctor used to say that. He said, Carl, when you doubt your belief in yourself, he said, believe in my belief in you. And that got me by many, many things as well. Because when I started to doubt myself, I fell back on what he told me. He said, when you doubt your own belief, believe in my belief in you. He said, because I believe in you. And that's in essence what Alex Pyrus was saying to me years earlier. He was giving me that moniker and said, I think you're a great hockey player. And I mean, I was on cloud nine, you know what I mean? And so that really, it's so important what we say to ourselves, and it's so important to have positive people that are building you up.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. So my culminating question in every podcast episode is I ask every guest to describe their journey so far in 3 words. So for you, as we talk about this whole way you found the idea of focus, time you spent in hockey, the mentors you've had, everything we've talked about, right? How would you summarize everything you've done so far, this journey that you're on and are going to continue to be on? How would you summarize it in 3 words?
A reluctant adventure.
Okay, I like that. So reluctant, what? Life's pulling you along, right? Why reluctant?
Just because I've gotten in my own way and been so reluctant in so many areas of my life where if I just would have had a different attitude, you know what I mean? And just a different outlook. It's been a great adventure. And I think I would have maybe smelled the roses a little bit more along the way. And maybe taken some more photographs, but there was reluctance for a long time.
Well, I think that's a common thing, right? So and the sooner we can all realize that, the better off we are, because then we can better take advantage of what's right in front of us.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you spending time with us, me and the listeners here today. As we wrap up here, where should I send people to find you? If they love what you have to say, they want to get more of C. Gordon Moose, where do they go?
Well, my website is www.yourfocusguy.com. And what I've got going right now is I've got about 10 spots. I'm offering people if they want to do a quick 15-minute, I call it Focus Foundation call. If they want to get in touch with me and have a 15-minute, no cost, no obligation, I call it Focus Foundation, just to kind of find out where they're at with regard to focus and productivity. They can email me and request a time to do that. I'd be more than happy to do that for your listeners at info@yourfocusguy.com. So just info@yourfocusguy.com. And if you just put in their Focus Foundation, I'll know what they're talking about. I'd be more than happy to schedule that with them.
Awesome. Well, we'll send them your way. Again, thanks. I appreciate your time.
And thank you, Miles. I'm glad we finally connected, and keep up the good work. And if there's anything I could ever do for you, let me know.
All right, thanks. All right, that's a wrap for this episode of Relish the Journey. Very special thanks to C. Gordon Moose for being our guest and for sharing his story. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us once again. As always, if you enjoyed this episode and feel like someone else you know would love it, please go ahead and share so that we can grow our audience. Also, if you wouldn't mind rating and subscribing to the podcast, that helps us move and groove up the charts and reach more people that way. So again, I am Miles Biggs, your host of Relish the Journey. Until next time, everybody, cheers.